Count Vlad Tepes, also known as Dracula, is the main antagonist in the animated adaptation of Castlevania by Netflix and Powerhouse Animation, based on the character of the same name from the video games. He serves as the primary antagonist in the first and second seasons, the overall posthumous antagonist in the third season, and a minor yet crucial character in the fourth and final season. The story follows the backdrop of the games, referencing the feud between Dracula and Leon Belmont, while hinting that Dracula might also have been the infamous Prince Vlad III of Wallachia. Dracula rose to become the strongest of vampires and the leader of his race. He harbored a disdain for humanity and was notorious for being a vampire of pure brutality, known for impaling his victims and massacring entire villages if they wronged him or displeased him in any way. In late medieval Europe, in Wallachia, Dracula lived alone in a castle capable of magical teleportation. He also possessed a vast wealth of scientific knowledge, stored deep within the castle. To deter visitors or thieves, Dracula displayed the impaled corpses of his victims at the front of the castle grounds, a warning promising a brutal and painful death to those who dared to ignore it. In 1455, he received an unexpected visit, a woman named Lisa, who was conducting research to improve medicine and wanted to become a doctor. She came to Dracula to learn from the science only he knew, but he threatened her with his distrust of humans. To his surprise, Lisa was not afraid and encouraged him to explore the changing world. Dracula was drawn to her and welcomed Lisa into his home. At some point later, Dracula married Lisa. Together they had a son named Adrian, who would later be known as Alucard. They then lived in a cabin on the outskirts of Targovist, where Lisa continued her medical research. At his wife's urging, Dracula traveled the world to learn about its people and their humanity. During his travels, he met and befriended two misanthropic humans who were master demon forgers, Hector and Isaac. In 1475, Vlad's happy days with Lisa came to an abrupt and tragic end. One night, returning home from his travels, he discovered that the cabin where the two had lived was completely burned down. He then encountered Mrs. Juvara, who had been treated by Lisa. While she was placing flowers, Vlad learned from her that Lisa had been arrested on false charges of witchcraft and was sentenced to death. Enraged, Vlad abandoned his human identity and became Dracula once more. He then warned Mrs. Juvara to take her family and leave Wallachia before teleporting in a column of fire. Arriving at the site of Lisa's execution, Dracula demanded to know what happened to his wife. When the bishop proclaimed she was a witch and he himself was just a myth, the vampire became furious and gave the people of Targovist a year to make peace with God before his return to destroy them. Returning to his castle, Dracula prepared to summon an army from hell in a year. However, his son Alucard appeared and pleaded with him not to kill innocent people. Dracula shouted that there were no innocents left because no one acted to save Lisa. Alucard attacked Dracula but was quickly defeated and allowed to leave afterwards. Dracula approached Hector and Isaac respectively to help create his new army with different perspectives, as Isaac immediately understood the need for genocide, while Hector preferred a more humane way of sacrificing humans. Nonetheless, both agreed to help build an army of night creatures from the dead. A year later, Dracula appeared in Targovist, as promised, before the Archbishop and the people celebrating Lisa's death and calling his existence a farce. He unleashed his army in Targovist, massacring the population, and the horde of night creatures proceeded to descend upon the rest of Wallachia. As the war dragged on and news of his horde's failure to kill the people of Greshid, Dracula called his vampire generals from around the known world to his castle to discuss his plans. His war council protested the state of the war, particularly the lack of strategy, where Dracula introduced his master forgers, Hector and Isaac, to his council as his new confidants to lead the war more effectively. This decision caused discord and outrage among the vampires, but Dracula silenced their protests. Despite this, discussions continued unchecked within the vampire leadership, with Dracula disheartened in his study or irritated by the fights. Carmilla soon arrived. However, instead of providing stability, she questioned Dracula's priorities in the war, starting with why he hadn't turned Lisa into a vampire in the first place, greatly enraging Dracula. Unknown to Dracula, Carmilla planned to assume power over the vampire world by inciting disloyalty among the vampire generals, and even between Hector and Isaac. Although she successfully manipulated Hector, Isaac was loyal to Dracula to the extreme. Even the Viking vampire Godbran began to wonder what vampires would do in the future once humanity was extinct, fearing what vampires would delight in. Dracula only expressed disinterest and anger at Godbran's concerns, which the Viking took as Dracula wanting to die, to be reunited with his wife and willing to let all vampires starve in the attempt, confirming that Dracula had gone mad. The situation between the vampires and their lord became complicated when details of the failure in Greshit came to light, that the villagers had help from a Belmont and that Alucard had awakened. Although he wasn't concerned about Alucard, the revelation that a Belmont, one of the few forces in the world that could truly threaten vampires, remained alive and awakened surprise and fear within them. In the end, the vampires grew tired of their current state and decided to invade the city of Braila and feed on its people. At that moment, Carmilla made her move against Dracula, causing most of his forces to assault his castle and try to kill him. However, her usurpation was crushed when Dracula dispatched most of her forces, and Alucard, Trevor Belmont, and Sypha Belnades arrived and killed the vampire generals. Isaac confirmed the presence of Alucard and Belmont and advised Dracula to return to his study. Dracula was moved by Isaac's loyalty and decided to save him from the intruders by sending him to the desert from whence he came, to Isaac's surprise and protest. Alone in his study, Dracula finally faced his son again, who claimed that his war had ended in his mother's name. Dracula responded that the war endured in Lisa's name. Regardless, although Alucard lamented with Dracula over Lisa's death, he refused to allow him to commit genocide. Dracula remained unmoved, reminding and recalling to Alucard that he couldn't stop him before. Alucard agreed but replied that he was alone before, in which Trevor and Sypha entered, ready to face the Lord of Vampires. Although Alucard initiated the attack, Dracula easily defeated his son and his allies, but together they gained an advantage to wound Dracula. Trevor's skill with the Morning Star Whip wounded and enraged Dracula enough to summon a burning magma orb over the trio. Despite his power, the three combined their forces to push back the fire orb, destructively sending it to him and Alucard through the castle to the central library. There, the father and son engaged in a vicious and brutal fistfight that took them both throughout the castle, but it became evident that Dracula was the stronger of the two. At that moment, Alucard armed himself with a wooden stake and stated that Dracula knew he died when Lisa did and that he wanted to die too, calling his war the longest suicide note in history. Dracula, angered once more, hits his son, forcing Alucard to strike his father with the stake, but he misses his heart. Dracula continued to beat his son deeper through the castle, but Alucard refused to back down, despite being overpowered. In the end, their battle took them to the room where Alucard grew up, the same room he and his beloved Lisa built for their son. Seeing the room and reminiscing about the memories he shared with his wife, restored a semblance of sanity, realizing he was killing his son, the best gift Lisa gave him. In his deepest moment, Dracula confirmed that as a result of his actions, he should already be dead. At that moment, Alucard armed himself again with a wooden stake made from his bedpost, and stabbed Dracula in the heart, heartbroken and crying blood tears. Dying, his body decaying rapidly, Dracula's form approached Alucard, but before he could do anything, Trevor and Sypha arrived and Belmont decapitated Dracula, thus finally killing him. Sypha then used her magic to burn Dracula's remains, which exploded into a fearsome black demonic cloud that spread through the castle before dissipating completely, leaving behind only his wedding ring. Dracula, the most powerful vampire in the world and the apex of his species, would meet his demise as a result of the actions of the Church, forcing his son and the heroes of humanity to rise and put an end to his madness. Although Alucard committed this act, he asserts that Dracula had died long ago when his mother Lisa passed away. With his castle empty and the internal knowledge too important to be left unattended, Alucard decides to take custody of the castle to ensure that the stored knowledge is neither stolen nor destroyed. Trevor even offers Alucard the remains of the Belmont stronghold to also ensure the safety of the knowledge collected by the Belmonts. Alucard, surprised and grateful, accepts. Trevor and Sypha then depart to forge a life together, leaving Alucard in the castle, where, alone in a study, he laments and cries over the loss of his loved ones. In the vampire world, the deaths of Dracula and his generals leave a power vacuum, with abandoned night creatures and upstart vampire factions wreaking havoc in the war-devastated region. Carmilla plans to take control of the vampire species, betraying and enslaving Hector with the intention of using his skills as a master forger to replenish her forces, returning to Styria with Hector in chains. Meanwhile, in the desert to which he was banished, Isaac decides to continue Dracula's war against humanity and seek revenge against Carmilla and Hector for their betrayal. Starting with a group of bandits, Isaac kills humans unfortunate enough to cross his path and converts their bodies into night creatures, growing his army over time. Not long after Dracula's death, a cult formed in the town of Lindenfeld with the hidden intention of bringing him back from the dead. Sala, the head of the village's priory, prepared a dark ritual to open a portal to hell through the infinite corridor. He was aided and even inspired in this task by a night creature known as the Visitor, whose blood would complete the ritual. When the portal opened, Saint Germain, a man investigating the cult, discovered that Dracula was in hell alongside his wife Lisa. When Dracula tried to reach the portal, Saint Germain, with the help of Trevor Belmont, killed the Visitor and closed the portal. Saint Germain disappeared into the infinite corridor in the process, but prevented Dracula from returning to Earth. Following the thwarted attempt to resurrect Dracula in Lindenfeld, several other groups would plan to do the same, covering 6 weeks of preparation and carefully planning in time to bring back the vampire lord. It became clear that the role and image of Dracula in both the human and vampire worlds were something sacred. Although Trevor Belmont and Sypha Belneds would traverse the fields of Wallachia, seemingly endlessly stopping hordes of Dracula cults and worshippers, it would not be enough. The goal of restoring the deceased Dracula became a shared objective by many, including the once righteous Count Saint Germain, who had become unhinged in his quest to reunite with his lover, who had disappeared into the infinite corridor. To once again bring Dracula and his wife out of hell, a sacrifice was necessary. A band of vampire magicians had assembled a body stitched from both male and female body parts. The disfigured hybrid was intended to imprison both Tepes and create a hermaphrodite, a dichotomy of two separate sexes intertwined in the same body. With the addition of enchantments and the power and rage of Dracula, this abomination had the ability to become a rubis, a tool strong enough to control the infinite corridor like the night creature in Lindenfeld, the Visitor. However, due to the sheer trauma of being torn from hell and brought back to the land of the living, along with the fear of Lisa's torment, Dracula's rage would know no bounds and be nothing but hate, malice, and destruction incarnate. This unknown information served as the definitive end of the true manipulator and deceiver of the series, who is death itself. The clouded Saint Germain, who had stripped himself of his morality to save the woman he loved, believed he controlled the entire procedure. However, in truth, he was deceived by an English vampire named Varney, disguised as an alchemist who had incited Germain to fully commit to his magician's education, which in turn revealed to be death itself. Ultimately, this plan was orchestrated by the eternal death-devouring creature due to its anger over Dracula's disappearance. The Vampire King's attack on the human race would have fed death incomparably and made it the most powerful being on the planet. As a being incapable of interacting with war and magic, death relied on murderous people like Dracula to keep it well-fed. Therefore, it wished to restore Dracula to his original plan, only now even more uncontrollable and insane. They managed to bring the Tepes couple to Dracula's castle and to the hermaphrodite, which was struggling to contain the two. Fortunately, their torture was interrupted when Alucard, Trevor, and Sypha destroyed the body, unknowingly releasing the spirits of the Tepes. The two souls awoke confused and suddenly came back to life. The next day, Dracula and Lisa took clothes from strangers and rented a room in a house, where they tried to make sense of things. Inevitably, they decided that they both had a second chance and chose to use it. The Tepes realized it would be better if they left their son alone for the moment and tried to end things, seeing how much devastation both of their deaths had caused. Dracula, uncharacteristically calm, suggested they travel to a remote place, a solitude suitable for them. He said he had been reading about an English town called Whitby, near the coast, with about 20 houses, little sun, and fish. Then, the two declared they could never survive without each other and fell asleep together in bed, finally embracing and awaiting a new and peaceful future. Personality. In this iteration, it's unclear how much of the traditional Dracula and Castlevania lore applies to this Dracula's backstory. Therefore, Dracula's background remains largely a mystery. What is clear is that by 1455, he had once killed humans and had been in conflict with Leon Belmont, but now he avoided them and lived an isolated life in his castle. Given Dracula's extreme intelligence, physical superiority, and his interaction with Lisa, it is strongly implied that he views humans as significantly inferior life forms. Where once he was involved in human affairs, by 1455 he saw no sense in wasting time with peasants. Though intelligent and of lordly stature, Dracula lacks charm. He has a wild and threatening nature, which only intensified after Lisa's death. While many would use weapons in combat, it is known that he uses his own claws like those of a lion or bear. Lisa herself noted his lack of charm and suggested that he might relearn manners from her. During their years of marriage, he took this seriously and had a much more human demeanor than usual. Before succumbing to madness and depression, Dracula would not suffer any insult, and delighted in meticulously planning the revenge of those who wronged him. Using both his supreme power and his mind, he maneuvered his prey before surgically striking his targets. This was demonstrated when 40 merchants offended him. He issued a threat that ensured the women and innocent children fled and understood the psychology of the merchants, who would stay in the city to protect their gold. He then killed those 40 men and only those 40, showing mercy to the rest of the city, but perhaps doing so to make it very clear that his massacre was not random. It was the cost of a transgression against Dracula. This would change in his war against humanity, where Dracula was devoid of pleasure, only desiring the death of everything and everyone. When Dracula and Lisa met and she asked to learn from him, they quickly developed a strong mutual attraction. Neither had met anyone like the other before. Dracula, of course, was attracted to Lisa's beauty, but even more so by her personality. He described her as definitely different from most humans he had known. Lisa's courage, courtesy, intelligence, and kind nature impressed him, and he allowed her to study with him. They soon married and had a son named Vlad Tepes. Lisa saw the best in Dracula and immediately recognized that he had the potential to improve the lives of humans everywhere with his knowledge. As per Lisa's wishes, he would spend much of his time traveling. He hoped that he would also learn from his travels and from humans as she did from him. Dracula himself seemed to appreciate her spirit, though his subsequent actions imply that he could never see other humans the way Lisa wished he would. In any case, the light of his experiences only turned to more ashes after he returned home to be informed that his wife had been executed. When Lisa was unjustly killed in 1475, Dracula felt deeply resentful towards humanity. He no longer viewed them as peasants, but now considered them all animals he could no longer tolerate. He would later admit that she was the only true love he had ever known. Immediately after Lisa's bones turned to ashes, Dracula rose from the flames of his wife and demanded an explanation. He became enraged upon learning that his wife had been killed for unjust dogmatic stupidity, and grew even more furious when the bishop who ordered the execution denied Dracula's existence. At that moment, Dracula proclaimed that he would take everything from the citizens of Wallachia and leave no sign that they ever existed. Although he surely knew his wife would not want him to take revenge, his heart was now so embittered that it was filled with absolute misanthropy. Dracula believes all humans are guilty of his wife's death, as none tried to stop the unjust murder, and therefore, when Alucard tried to reason with his father to kill only those responsible, Dracula angrily refuted him. To Dracula, Lisa was the only good thing humanity had produced, and humanity had killed her. He was even more than willing to severely injure his own son when he tried to reason with him and prevent him from committing genocide. Despite all this, Dracula seems to retain fractions of what he became after marrying Lisa. For example, although he had Alucard at his mercy, he did not pursue him further after inflicting a serious wound, which seems to show that the only person with whom Dracula has any remaining attachment was his son, as he could have easily killed him but let him escape, which apparently means he simply wanted to incapacitate Alucard long enough for his massacre to be completed. Also, unusually, when he warned the old woman to flee, showing that at least he has a softer side for those who were not blinded by the accusations of the reasons for his wife's death enough to not want to kill them. It is worth noting that he also issued a 1-year warning to humanity to make peace. Dracula was even more disappointed with humanity that no human paid attention to his warning or repented before him. telling them before unleashing his army that they had their chance. A year later, Dracula began his war of extermination, unleashing an army from hell in Targovishte, ordering his army to kill all humans and accepting his future eternity of endless hate. Despite being on a quest for vengeance to end all humanity, Dracula becomes increasingly downtrodden over time, largely isolating himself from the rest of his court and leaving the command of his army in the hands of his forge masters, Hector and Isaac. He does not care much for strategy, as long as all humanity dies in the end, to the great discomfort of his generals. Dracula planned to use machines to darken the sky and allow vampires and hordes of night creatures to rule the world. However, many of his generals in Alucard observe that Dracula's plans are self-destructive. Godbrand realizes that the human genocide will mean the end of the food supply for vampires, and that no one would survive Dracula's plans for the world. Alucard notes that Dracula is dragging the entire world with him into the longest suicide note in history. When Alucard storms his castle with Trevor and Sypha, Dracula shows great care towards Isaac by banishing him to the desert, not wanting his friend to be killed. Dracula really admired Isaac's unbreakable loyalty, recognizing him as one of the greatest of his kind. He mercilessly overwhelms and beats Trevor and Sypha, mocking them for their inferiority, but never deals the fatal blow to Alucard, mainly ignoring his son unless he attacks, at which point he counterattacks savagely but does not deal any truly decisive blows. Only after being angry enough was he willing to brutalize his son, but even in such murderous rage, his love for his son shone through, when after reaching the room where he and his wife raised Alucard, Dracula finally came out of his murderous rage and started crying upon realizing he was killing the greatest treasure Lisa had given him. Dracula realized at that moment that Alucard had been right about him. He had been dead inside and fallen into madness the day Lisa was killed. He subsequently allowed his son to kill him. In short, Dracula is a broken and embittered man trying to kill all humanity in revenge, but he feels no pleasure or joy in this, nor does he care about the fact that he could potentially starve his own army in the process. He is so indifferent that Alucard believes Dracula only waged war on humanity because he wanted to die, because he is figuratively dead without Lisa. Dracula died as a broken being, but also expressing the love he had left for his son, the greatest gift his beloved wife had given him, which allowed him to finally be at peace as he reunited with his wife in the afterlife. Dracula's spirit briefly appeared before Alucard and showed no hostility, briefly nodding before disappearing, apparently making peace with his son. Death was not the end of Dracula, but a new beginning. Now, a spirit in hell, he could be with Lisa again. The choice to seek her out was Dracula's first sane act since he died. After he found her, they embraced and found comfort even in hell itself. Being with his beloved Lisa, Dracula regained sanity and tranquility. Dracula and Lisa would be revived and chose not to return to their old lives so that their son Alucard could find closure to all that bitterness. With Lisa by his side, Dracula was enthusiastic about living with a small community of humans in a quiet area of England. They were finally free to start a new peaceful life together. Powers and abilities. Dracula is known to be the strongest vampire in the world. He possesses many of the usual characteristics of vampirism: fangs, claws, pale skin, and drinks blood. He does not appear to be subject to the usual weaknesses of vampires, as seen in how he asked if Lisa was armed with silver, crosses, and garlic, calling her superstitious, which implies he is immune to them, or at least they have minimal effect on him. So far, Dracula has not been seen in sunlight, although he traveled on foot around the world for many years, implying that he was also immune to it. He can go without drinking human blood without problems, as seen in how he, in his depression over Lisa's death, sat in his library without drinking blood for months and still demonstrated being in full power when he fought directly. The only confirmed weakness of vampires that works on Dracula is a stake driven directly into his heart, along with decapitation. Additionally, Dracula is immortal and cannot die of old age. The details of his immortality are not yet clear, but as an immortal, Dracula retains his physical prime and, despite his imposing appearance, has extraordinary superhuman strength, speed, durability, endurance, and reflexes beyond his appearance. He is capable of easily crushing hard objects like solid stone with his own hands and was able to defeat Alucard in an instant. and leave him seriously injured despite his own resistance, recovery, speed, and reflexes. He could kill several merchants and fellow vampires by himself without any effort by quickly and easily dodging several arrows fired by an expert shooter. In addition, Dracula was able to seriously injure Sypha, leaving several severe scratches that required bandages, completely surpassing Trevor in terms of physical power, as he did not react when Trevor hit him in the face, effortlessly deflected Trevor's attacks, and quickly defeated the Belmont with a single punch in the stomach. Dracula also survived the Morning Star Whip, which killed all vampires hit by it in a single blow, although it did briefly bring him to his knees and informed Belmont that it was at least a formidable weapon for vampires, even if not for him, and recovered from Sypha and Alucard, returning his own massive dark inferno without any damage. Dracula still retained more than enough power to quickly overwhelm Alucard, capable of breaking the castle and constantly wearing down and injuring Alucard and sending him flying through the rooms, also being able to withstand many high-speed hits from Alucard's teleportation speed and eventually stopping him by grabbing his head in the middle of the attack. Most likely, it would have been impossible for them to have killed him if it had not been his son fighting him, who revealed to Dracula how crazy he had become. Dracula's supreme power is respected by all vampires and monsters. When he calls, demons respond without disobedience, and vampires must at least pay attention to the call. Dracula has built a solid relationship with his two forge masters, Hector and Isaac, allowing him to create an army of night monsters that mindlessly obey each of his orders. Vampire lords decide for themselves if they are loyal to Dracula, but none would dare to openly oppose him, or at least not before preparing extensively. Dracula has tremendous control over fire. He can transform his body into flames and project himself through fire anywhere. He can manifest fire anywhere, even in the sky. He can also teleport through flames. When fighting the trio at the end, Dracula manifested a huge burning ball of fire similar to molten lava. It was powerful enough that Sypha couldn't deflect it without the help of Trevor and Alucard. Dracula has the ability to defy gravity and float above the ground. He can move through the air at speeds far superior to those of his son, surpassing and hitting his son to subdue him to the ground quite quickly. Interestingly, bats often gather around the castle. It has been shown that Dracula projects his own image and voice through flocks of crows. Dracula wielded extraordinary power and mastery as a martial artist, and was able to achieve this degree of power using only the power of his body and his millennial experience. His powers and physical abilities were extraordinary, and he has been seen to have a methodical but wild fighting style, throwing powerful punches with millimeter precision and using his reflexes to easily deflect even the most talented fighters' attacks. Even distant opponents were not safe, as he could instantly scale walls and kill with perfectly directed blows and cuts. His abilities allowed him to effortlessly kill many merchants and vampires, instantly advance and seriously injure Alucard, quickly dominate Trevor Belmont armed with his whip, and even weakened by having been hit by the Morning Star Whip and his fireball deflected. He could still beat Alucard for most of their altercation. Dracula, having been an ancient immortal who had accumulated centuries of forgotten knowledge and innovated on them, is easily the most informed being in world history, to the point that Alucard called him a repository of centuries of learning and knowledge, and noted that an inestimable amount of knowledge would be lost with his death. During his immortal life, he had become an extremely brilliant scientific, engineering, and technological genius, and is the world's leading expert in many fields. He was a competent master, passing on his knowledge of medical science to Lisa, and effectively turning her into the best doctor in her city, capable of feats beyond any other, and also having shaped Alucard into becoming a highly educated person. It is recognized that even with the knowledge of the Belmonts in Castlevania, Alucard would not really rival Dracula. Many of his inventions and constructions are centuries ahead of their time, and some are even beyond 21st century technology. In addition, he is very educated and knowledgeable in the use of magic, which he has applied to his inventions. It is strongly implied that he himself designed and built the castle. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with our latest content. We love hearing from our viewers, so please leave a comment and share your ideas for future videos. Thanks for your support, and we can't wait to see you again in our next video.